Imani's project, submitted for a scholarship at the middle school she dreamed of attending, was mocked and ridiculed. Undeterred, she set out on a mission of quiet determination, ready to take control of her own destiny. Her initial goal was to earn a scholarship, but she aimed even higher. With an app she developed herself, she would organize conferences for kids and even attract investors. Imani didn't just create an app. With every line of code, she built a new reality, proving that her talent was not only real but unstoppable. Let's follow this incredible journey and see how it all began with just a few discouraging words from the school principal. If you liked the video and have subscribed to my channel, let's move on to our story. Enjoy watching. Imani's world was a kaleidoscope of color and code. At 15 years old, she was a quiet force of nature, a girl who found more joy in the clean, elegant logic of a Python script than in the chaotic social hierarchies of Northwood Academy. Northwood wasn't just any middle school, it was an institution, a sanctum of old money and older traditions, nestled in a manicured suburb where every lawn was the same shade of emerald green. Imani, on a scholarship for gifted students, felt like a vibrant splash of rebellion in a world of muted beige. Her mind, a whirlwind of algorithms and user interfaces, was a stark contrast to the school's rigid classical curriculum. The school's ruler, in a silk scarf and tailored suit, was Principal Albright. Her name alone conjured images of polished mahogany and disapproving frowns. Albright was a walking, talking embodiment of Northwood's values: tradition, discipline, and a quiet, almost imperceptible disdain for anything new. She believed that education was about molding young minds into a pre-approved shape, teaching them to appreciate Chaucer and debate in a manner befitting future titans of industry. She saw technology not as a creative tool but as a necessary evil, a disruptive force that threatened the very foundation of her carefully constructed world. Imani's first real clash with Principal Albright came not in a formal meeting, but in a brief, seemingly innocuous encounter in the hallway. Imani had been selected as a finalist for the school's prestigious Innovators of Tomorrow grant, a grant that, ironically, had never before been awarded to a student focusing on software. Her project was an intricate cloud-based platform designed to help local farmers track crop yields and market trends, a fusion of her rural hometown roots and her love for technology. "Imani, a moment please," Principal Albright's voice, smooth as polished granite, cut through the bustle of students. Imani stopped, her heart doing a quick, nervous stutter. "Yes, Principal Albright?" The principal's eyes, a piercing shade of pale blue, scanned Imani's casual attire, a t-shirt with a vintage graphic and worn-out jeans, a silent judgment. "I was just reviewing the finalists for the grant," she said, her voice dripping with an unctuous politeness that was more unnerving than a shout. "Your project, a farming app, is it? Quite ambitious." "Thank you," Imani replied, a flicker of pride in her voice. "I've spent the last 6 months on it. I think it could genuinely help the local agricultural community." Principal Albright offered a thin, almost invisible smile. "Helping the community is a noble pursuit, of course. But perhaps for a young lady of your talents, a more structured field would be more suitable. Engineering, perhaps? Or even architecture. Something with tangible, demonstrable skills. The arts of logic and reasoning are best applied to the physical world, don't you think?" Imani's smile faltered. The subtext was clear. Coding isn't a real skill. It's a hobby. It's not what we do here. The unspoken words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't a direct condemnation but a slow, quiet dismissal. "I believe coding is a very structured field actually," she said, her voice tight with the frustration she fought to suppress. "It requires a great deal of logic and problem solving." "Of course, dear," Albright said, her smile broadening with an air of condescending finality. "But it lacks the tangible beauty of a blueprint, or the historical gravity of an equation that has stood the test of time. A program is fleeting. And besides, there are certain aptitudes for these pursuits. Aptitudes that are not always cultivated in all of us." She didn't have to finish the sentence. The "all of us" hung there, a veiled reference to race and class, a whisper of a century of institutional prejudice. With a final, dismissive nod, she glided away, leaving Imani standing alone in the hallway, the words echoing in her mind. Imani felt a hot, prickling sensation behind her eyes. It wasn't the rejection that stung so much as the quiet, insidious way it had been delivered. She had spent countless hours coding, debugging, and building. She had taught herself multiple languages, devoured online tutorials, and stayed up late into the night, her fingers flying across the keyboard. And for what? To be told that her passion was little more than a child's fleeting fancy, something that didn't fit into the hallowed halls of Northwood. Her friend, Chloe, found her a moment later, her bright, inquisitive face a welcome sight. Chloe was the opposite of Imani in every way, outgoing, popular, and a natural artist. But she saw the beauty in Imani's code, the same way she saw the beauty in a perfectly rendered landscape. She saw the art in it. "What's wrong?" Chloe asked, immediately sensing Imani's mood. Imani just shook her head, unable to put Principal Albright's words into a coherent sentence. How could she explain the feeling of being judged not for her work but for who she was? Nothing. Just a bad feeling about the grant. Chloe wrapped an arm around her, a comforting gesture. "Hey, it's not a big deal. Whatever happens, your app is amazing. You're a genius, Imani. You don't need their grant to prove it." But the words had done their damage. They had planted a seed of doubt, a tiny, insidious thought that maybe Principal Albright was right. Maybe coding wasn't a real skill. Maybe it was just a hobby, something she would one day grow out of. Maybe the world of computers and algorithms wasn't meant for her after all. And that thought, more than any outright rejection, was what truly terrified her. As she walked to her next class, a new, cold resolve began to settle in her stomach. She would win that grant. She would prove Principal Albright wrong. And she would do it not just for herself, but for every quiet, passionate girl who had ever been told that her dreams weren't real enough. The sanctum of Northwood had spoken, but Imani, the quiet force, was about to reply. Principal Albright's dismissive words had done little to deter Imani, but they had fundamentally changed the nature of her ambition. The Innovators of Tomorrow grant, once a mere goal, had become a battleground. It was no longer about a scholarship. It was a matter of principle. The following weeks were a blur of frenzied activity. Imani worked with a singular, almost obsessive focus, refining her agricultural app. She stayed late in the school's computer lab, her fingers dancing across the keyboard, the rhythmic clatter a testament to her quiet defiance. Her code was no longer just about function. It was a defiant, digital roar. The grant presentation day loomed over the school like a storm cloud. The finalists were to present their projects to a panel of judges, a mix of faculty members and a few esteemed alumni. Principal Albright, of course, presided over the entire affair, her presence a heavy blanket of scrutiny. She made a point of stopping by Imani's station multiple times, each visit an exercise in thinly veiled disapproval. "Still working on your little app, dear?" she'd ask, her voice a saccharine melody. "I do hope the technology is reliable. I've always found that the more complex a system, the more likely it is to fail." Each time, Imani would simply offer a polite nod and return to her work, her jaw clenched. She knew what Principal Albright was doing. It was a classic move, a subtle form of psychological warfare designed to sow seeds of doubt. But Imani refused to let them take root. She was confident in her code. It was clean, efficient, and thoroughly tested. What she hadn't anticipated was the sabotage, a betrayal so insidious it would rock her to her core. The day of the presentation, just minutes before the judges were due to arrive, Imani ran a final diagnostic on her laptop. She had worked late the night before, making a few last-minute tweaks to the UI. She saw the familiar green light, the program ready to go. A quick trip to the water fountain, and she was back at her station, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and nerves. She sat down, took a deep breath, and hit the run button. Nothing. The screen remained blank. Imani's blood ran cold. She tried again, a frantic click of the mouse. Still nothing. Her hands began to shake as she opened the file directory. She scrolled through the list, her eyes darting from one file to the next. The project folder, once a treasure trove of carefully organized scripts and assets, was now a digital wasteland. A single, cryptic error message stared back at her. Syntax error, line 1, unidentified symbol. A chill went down her spine. This wasn't a bug, it was intentional. Someone had maliciously corrupted her code. Her eyes darted around the room, settling for a brief, terrifying moment on a student from the rival computer club, a boy named Brandon who was standing at a nearby station, a smug smirk playing on his lips. His project, a generic game about building empires, was considered a favorite for the grant. Imani's mind raced. The presentation was in 5 minutes. She had spent 6 months on this project and now it was gone. The app was corrupt beyond a quick fix. She would have to rewrite it from the ground up, a task that would take days, not minutes. She felt a wave of crushing despair wash over her. All her hard work, all her defiance had been for nothing. Principal Albright, her face a mask of faux concern, approached Imani's station. "Having some technical difficulties, dear? It's a shame. Perhaps you're right, and technology is best left to those with a more pragmatic approach. After all, the sciences of the physical world are far less prone to these digital maladies." The words were a brutal, final blow. It was as if Principal Albright had been waiting for this exact moment for Imani's downfall, to validate her archaic beliefs. Imani couldn't even bring herself to look up, the humiliation too great. She had been so confident, so sure of her own abilities, and now, in this moment of crisis, she was a wreck. She felt a familiar hot sensation behind her eyes, but this time, it was a feeling of defeat. The feeling that she had been right all along, but had just been in the wrong place. The world of elite schools and sanctioned grants wasn't for her. Her passion, her skill, was something to be built from the ground up, not approved from a committee. As the judges began to make their rounds, Imani slowly closed her laptop. The grant was lost. The competition was over. And as Principal Albright led the judges away from her station, Imani felt a strange, quiet clarity settle over her. She would no longer be fighting for their approval. She would be building something for herself, something that was so good, so powerful, that it would leave the world of Northwood Academy behind entirely. The sting of defeat was still fresh, but it was now laced with a steely resolve. She had been told she couldn't code. And for the first time in her life, Imani was going to prove that they had no idea what they were talking about. Her next project wouldn't be a grant application, it would be a revolution. The fluorescent lights of the Northwood Academy computer lab seemed to mock Imani as she walked away from her shattered project. The rhythmic hum of the servers, once a soothing white noise, now sounded like a death knell. She didn't look back, didn't spare a glance for Chloe's concerned face or the triumphant sneer she knew was on Brandon's. The feeling of defeat was a lead weight in her stomach, but beneath it, a tiny ember of something fierce and unyielding began to glow. It wasn't the anger she had felt in the hallway, or the humiliation she had just endured. It was a cold, pure resolve. She had been foolish to seek validation from a system designed to exclude her. The grant, the approval, Principal Albright's smile, none of it mattered. The only thing that mattered was the work itself. She walked out of the school and straight past her waiting bus, her feet carrying her with a purpose she hadn't felt in months. She needed to get away from the manicured lawns and the judgmental glances, from a world that saw her as an outlier, a problem to be solved or a project to be dismissed. She found herself at a small, independent coffee shop she'd visited once before. It was a haven of mismatched furniture, the smell of brewing coffee, and the quiet, focused energy of freelancers and students with their laptops open. She ordered a black coffee, a bitter taste for a bitter moment, and sat in a corner booth, the screen of her laptop a dark mirror. She opened the corrupted file again, not to fix it but to look at the wreckage. 1,000 lines of code, a symphony of logic and function, reduced to gibberish by a single malicious line of code injected at the top of the file. A digital act of vandalism. As she stared at the mess, her mind began to clear. The farming app had been good, a logical and useful tool. But it had been designed for a world that existed outside of her. It had been an offering, a plea for acceptance. Her next project wouldn't be an offering. It would be a fortress. The idea came to her with the force of a revelation. She would build an app that was the antithesis of Northwood. If the school was an exclusive club with a velvet rope and a biased bouncer, her app would be a public park, a town hall. It would be a platform for people like her, the quiet ones, the innovators, the artists, the thinkers, who had been told their ideas weren't tangible enough. It wouldn't be about competing for a grant, it would be about creating a space where people could share their projects, find mentors, and collaborate without a gatekeeper. It would be a community built not on legacy or wealth, but on merit and passion. She would call it Nexus. The name felt right. It meant a connection, a series of links. It was about forging new paths, creating a network outside the established ones. The scope of the project was daunting. It would need a robust back-end for user authentication and data storage, a dynamic front end for a seamless user experience, and a scalable architecture to handle a potentially large number of users. It was a project that a team of experienced developers would spend a year on. But Imani wasn't a team. She was a singular force, driven by a fury that was now channeled into pure creative energy. For the next few weeks, her life became a blur of caffeine and code. She woke up early before the sun, to squeeze in 2 hours of coding before school. During lunch breaks, she was no longer with Chloe, but tucked away in a quiet corner of the library, a laptop open and her fingers flying across the keys. After school, she went straight back to the coffee shop, a silent sentinel in her corner booth, the glow of her screen a beacon in the twilight. She dove into the deep end of open-source libraries, teaching herself new frameworks and database management systems. She learned to build RESTful APIs, manage asynchronous data calls, and design a UI that was both intuitive and aesthetically pleasing. It was a self-imposed boot camp, a trial by fire. The initial days were the hardest. She was building something she had no blueprint for, a house of cards that felt like it could collapse at any moment. There were moments of despair, late nights where a single bug would consume her for hours, a relentless hunt for a misplaced semicolon or a logical error in a block of code. But with each bug she fixed, with each new feature she successfully implemented, the ember of resolve grew into a steady flame. This was her work. This was her protest. Every line of code was a rebuttal to Principal Albright's veiled insults, a direct challenge to the idea that her talent wasn't real. One evening, exhausted and frustrated after a full day of debugging, she stumbled upon an online developer forum. She had never posted on one before, but in her desperation she decided to ask a question about a particularly tricky database query. Within minutes, she received a reply from a user with the handle Quantum Leap. The reply wasn't just an answer, it was a detailed breakdown of the problem, a philosophical discussion about database design, and a gentle piece of advice. Don't think about the solution, Quantum Leap wrote, think about the problem. The code will follow. This simple piece of advice was a watershed moment. It reframed her entire approach. She stopped thinking about the how, and started focusing on the why. Why did people need Nexus? What was the core problem she was trying to solve? She began to see her project not just as a technical challenge, but as a human one. The app needed to be more than just functional, it needed to be empathetic. It needed to be a place where a girl with a big idea could feel seen and heard, a place where a person's worth wasn't measured by their family's wealth or their school's prestige. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of creativity. She built the user authentication system, the core profile creation process, and a simple but elegant project sharing feature. She was no longer just a coder, she was an architect, a designer, a visionary. She was building a world. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, a furious ballet of motion and purpose. And as the 1-month mark approached, she sat back in her chair, staring at the screen. The initial raw version of Nexus was a reality. It was a simple interface, but beneath the clean lines and minimalist design lay a foundation of powerful, resilient code. It was a digital phoenix, rising from the ashes of her defeat, ready to take flight. The launch of Nexus was not marked by a blaring announcement or a school-wide assembly. It was a quiet act, a digital whisper. One night, a month after her crushing defeat, Imani pushed the final version of the app to the cloud. She sat in her corner booth at the coffee shop, the laptop screen casting a soft glow on her face, and typed out a short, concise message. It was a simple invitation, a link to the Nexus platform sent to a handful of students she knew. The quiet artists, the aspiring novelists, the kids in the chess club who were more interested in strategy than in social standing. Her first and most important message, however, was to Chloe. Chloe's reply came a few minutes later, a flurry of emojis and exclamations. Imani, it's amazing. It's a whole world in here. That was precisely the point. While Northwood Academy celebrated its sanctioned innovators, its halls were filled with unsanctioned brilliance. A boy named Liam, who spent his free time building intricate dioramas of historical battles, was one of the first to join. He uploaded photos of his latest project, a miniature recreation of the Battle of Thermopylae, complete with tiny hand-painted figures. The platform's elegant design made his work look like a museum exhibit. Another student, Mia, who had been a runner-up in the school's poetry slam, found a new audience for her verse. She uploaded a collection of poems, and within hours she had comments and feedback from other students, a dialogue of shared creativity that Northwood had never fostered. Imani watched in quiet awe as her app came to life. It was like watching a forest grow tree by tree, with each new project a testament to the untapped genius that existed just beneath the surface of Northwood's perfectly polished veneer. She saw a student from the robotics club, a girl who had been ridiculed for her interest in boys' toys, share her code for a robotic arm. Another, a gifted musician, uploaded a digital composition, a symphony of electronic and classical sounds that earned her dozens of compliments. The most profound connection, however, came from an anonymous student who posted a 3D rendering of a fantastical city. The project was breathtakingly detailed, a fusion of Gothic architecture and futuristic spires. The post was accompanied by a single line of text: "This is where I go when the real world gets too loud." Imani felt a lump form in her throat. She understood. Nexus wasn't just a platform for sharing work, it was a sanctuary. News of the app spread with the speed of a digital current. Within a week, the user base had grown from a handful of students to over 100. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive. "Finally, a place where I don't have to pretend," one user commented. Another wrote, "This is what the innovators' grant should have been about." The ripples of this unsanctioned success eventually reached the perfectly manicured office of Principal Albright. The first hint came in the form of a call from an indignant parent who had stumbled upon the app on her son's phone. "What is this Nexus app?" the parent demanded. "He's spending more time on it than his AP calculus homework. And the school didn't approve it." Albright, who had dismissed the agricultural app as a fleeting fancy, felt a cold knot of dread form in her stomach. A student-run platform, a digital meeting place outside the school's control, was a direct violation of her carefully constructed order. She instructed her assistant to investigate immediately. What she found was far more troubling than a simple chat app. She found a thriving community of creators, a digital mirror of her school where students were celebrating passions she had deemed unworthy or had never even known about. The projects were diverse and vibrant, from intricate digital paintings to complex coding projects. She saw Imani's name attached to the platform not as a project but as the creator, the architect, the admin. The girl she had dismissed, the girl she had quietly condemned for her inaptitude, had built something real, something tangible, something that was growing and thriving outside of her carefully controlled ecosystem. Principal Albright felt a surge of rage, cold and sharp. This wasn't just a challenge to her authority, it was a public rebuke. She immediately typed out an email to Imani, the subject line a single, declarative command: "My office. Now." Imani was in the middle of a history lecture when her phone buzzed with the notification. She read the email, a quiet sense of foreboding settling over her. She knew this was coming. This was the moment she had been preparing for, not with lines of code, but with a newfound resolve. She waited until the class ended, then walked directly to the principal's office. The journey felt shorter than her last visit to the hallway, but infinitely more significant. The principal's office smelled of leather and lemon polish. Principal Albright sat behind her large mahogany desk, her face a mask of disappointment. "Imani, I understand you have created a new application. A social networking app, from what I'm told. One that is entirely unsanctioned and, from what I can gather, in direct violation of our school's policy on unauthorized digital platforms." "It's not a social networking app, Principal Albright," Imani said, her voice steady. "It's a portfolio platform. A place for students to share their projects." "A semantic difference at best," Albright countered, her tone dripping with disdain. "And it's a direct challenge to the school's authority. You developed it on your own time, using your own equipment, you will say. But it is still a disruption. A nuisance. It is the very kind of unstructured, chaotic distraction that Northwood Academy has always worked to avoid." Imani felt a new kind of power surge through her. She was no longer a student pleading for a grant. She was the builder of a community. "It's not unstructured, Principal. It's built on a foundation of collaboration and shared interest. The students are finding mentors, forming connections, and sharing work that they couldn't anywhere else. This isn't a distraction, it's a supplement to what the school provides. A supplement to the very things you told me weren't real." Albright's eyes narrowed. "I believe you misunderstood my words, Imani. I merely suggested that certain aptitudes." "I didn't misunderstand you," Imani cut her off, her voice low but firm. You told me that coding wasn't a real skill. You dismissed my project as a little app, and told me that my work was fleeting. And when my work was sabotaged, you were there to deliver the final blow. I didn't come here to ask for anything. I came to tell you that this app, this platform, is as real as anything in this school. It is built with logic, with code, with design. It is tangible, demonstrable proof of a skill set that you refuse to acknowledge. The silence that followed was deafening. Principal Albright's face, usually so composed, was a tableau of shock and fury. Imani had shattered the delicate facade of politeness and deference. The power dynamic had shifted. It was no longer a principal speaking to a student, but a gatekeeper staring at a phoenix. You have two choices, Imani, Albright said, her voice barely a whisper, a tremor of pure anger beneath the surface. You can take the app down immediately, or I will be forced to take disciplinary action. Suspension, perhaps. The withdrawal of your scholarship. Imani's heart hammered against her ribs, but her mind was as clear as the code she had written. She thought of Liam's diorama, of Mia's poems, of the anonymous city that existed in a world beyond Northwood. She had a responsibility now, not just to herself but to the community she had built. I won't take it down, she said. The words hung in the air, a declaration of war. Principal Albright's eyes flashed with a cold, terrifying rage. The standoff was in motion. The silence in Principal Albright's office was not an absence of sound, but a void filled with unsaid threats. Imani had delivered her final word, a single, I won't take it down, and now she stood, her body a quiet testament to a new and unshakable resolve. Principal Albright's face, usually so composed, was a mask of cold fury. The carefully constructed polite veneer had shattered. Very well, Imani, the principal said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper. You have made your choice, and so have I. As of this moment, you are suspended from Northwood Academy, pending a full review by the Board of Trustees. Your scholarship is under review, and I will be recommending its immediate termination. Imani felt a jolt of fear, a primal shock that shot through her veins. Suspension. The end of her academic life at Northwood. The scholarship that had been her family's ticket to a better future. But even as the fear gripped her, a new feeling rose to meet it, a quiet defiance. They could take the school, they could take the scholarship, but they couldn't take her work. They couldn't take Nexus. I understand, Imani said, her voice trembling slightly but her gaze unwavering. My parents will be in contact. She turned and walked out of the office, the click of the door behind her a final, definitive sound. The hallway, which had felt like a suffocating cage just a month ago, now felt like a prison she had just escaped. She walked out of the school and into the crisp autumn air, a feeling of both loss and liberation washing over her. She was a digital exile, banished for building something real. But outside the hallowed halls of Northwood, her app was thriving. The news of Imani's suspension spread through the school like wildfire. It was whispered in the hallways, texted in group chats, and debated in the cafeteria. The student body was polarized. Some, those who had always thrived within Northwood's rigid system, saw her as a rule breaker, a troublemaker who had challenged authority. But the majority, especially those who had found a home in Nexus, saw her as a martyr, a hero who had sacrificed her place for their freedom. Chloe was the first to find her, a flurry of concern and outrage. Imani, I heard. It's not fair. We have to do something. Imani just shook her head. We already did something, Chloe. We built Nexus. They can suspend me, but they can't stop the app. They can't stop what we built. But Principal Albright wasn't finished. She knew that simply suspending Imani wouldn't be enough. The app was still out there, a direct challenge to her authority. The next day she sent out a school-wide email, a masterpiece of corporate speak and veiled threats. It didn't mention Imani by name, but it referenced an unauthorized digital platform that was disrupting the learning environment and exposing students to unmoderated content. She declared that any student found using the app would face disciplinary action, up to and including suspension. She also contacted the local media, painting the platform as a dangerous, unmoderated tool that posed a risk to students. Her campaign was a targeted effort to dismantle what Imani had built, to scare the users away and discredit her work. The digital backlash was immediate. A few of the more timid users, afraid of suspension, deleted their accounts. The traffic on Nexus slowed to a trickle. A wave of panic and uncertainty rippled through the community. Imani watched the numbers plummet, a painful gut-wrenching feeling of dread settling in. Principal Albright was winning. She couldn't take down the app itself, but she was dismantling its community, one terrified user at a time. The world was bigger than Northwood, but the fear of consequences was a powerful and very tangible force. As Imani sat in her room, the screen of her laptop a grim reflection of her plummeting user count, her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. She hesitated, then answered. "Hello? This is Imani." A deep, warm voice on the other end replied, "Imani, my name is Marcus Thorne. I'm a software engineer at a tech company. You may know me as Quantum Leap." Imani's heart skipped a beat. Quantum Leap. The user who had given her that pivotal piece of advice. "Quantum Leap, you're a real person?" "I am," Marcus said with a quiet chuckle. "And I've been following your work. You're building something incredible. I've also been following the news. I heard what that principal of yours is trying to do." There was a pause. "She's wrong, you know. She's not just wrong about you. She's wrong about what technology is and what it can be. And she's not going to win." Imani felt a wave of relief so profound it brought tears to her eyes. She wasn't alone. Someone, a real professional, saw her work for what it was. Marcus went on, "I have an idea. It's a risk. A big one. But if you're willing to take it, I think we can change the narrative. We can show them that what you've built isn't a danger. It's a revolution." He outlined his plan, a daring, audacious move that would require Imani to put herself and her work on a very public stage. It would mean stepping out of the shadows of her suspension and into the harsh glare of the public eye. It was a terrifying proposition, but as he spoke, Imani felt the ember of resolve that had been rekindled in the coffee shop flare into a bonfire. She wasn't a victim. She was a creator, a builder. And it was time to show the world what she had built. "I'm in," Imani said, her voice stronger than she had ever heard it before. "Tell me what we need to do." The fight had just gone from a school-wide skirmish to a very public battle for the heart of the digital world. And Imani, the girl who had been told she couldn't code, was ready to fight. She wasn't just fighting for her app anymore. She was fighting for her place in the world. Imani's hands trembled as she ended the call with Marcus Thorne. The conversation was a whirlwind of technical terms, daring proposals, and a sense of validation she had never felt before. He had laid out a plan so audacious, so completely counter to Principal Albright's playbook, that it took her breath away. This wasn't just about defiance, it was about strategy, about turning a public smear campaign into a public relations victory. Marcus, the quantum leap of her online world, had a plan to expose the truth, not with words but with code. The first step was to meet. The next day, Imani found herself at a small, unassuming office building downtown, far from the polished, monolithic structures of Northwood Academy. Marcus Thorne was not the grizzled, world-weary developer she had imagined. He was a man in his late 20s with kind eyes, a warm smile and a quiet, assured confidence. He was wearing a simple t-shirt with a company logo she didn't recognize, and his office was a beautiful chaos of monitors, keyboards, and server racks. "Imani," he said, standing and extending a hand. "It's a privilege to meet you. I've been following your work on the forums for a while. Your approach to problem solving is unique. You're not just looking for a fix, you're looking for the why. That's the mark of a true innovator." Imani felt a blush creep up her neck. To hear a professional use words like innovator and true in the same sentence as her name was both humbling and incredibly encouraging. She looked around his office, a sanctuary of pure technical creativity, and knew she was in the right place. Marcus got straight to the point. "So here's the plan. Principal Albright is trying to discredit Nexus by painting it as a security risk, a lawless digital playground. We're going to prove her wrong. We're going to host a public tech showcase. We'll find a public space, a library, a community center, and we'll invite local tech bloggers, reporters, and most importantly, the parents of Northwood Academy. We'll show them exactly what Nexus is. A live, verifiable demonstration of your code, your security measures, and the positive, collaborative community you've built." The idea was terrifying. A public stage, a live demonstration, the potential for a spectacular failure. It was the antithesis of her quiet, corner booth coding sessions. But as Marcus explained the logic, it made perfect sense. They couldn't fight Principal Albright's narrative from the shadows. They had to step into the light. The truth was their most powerful weapon. But what if something goes wrong? Imani asked, her voice a whisper. What if the code breaks under pressure? Marcus smiled. It won't. I've been looking at your work, Imani. The core of Nexus is solid. You built it right from the ground up. You thought about scalability and security even when you didn't have to. You're a natural. We'll spend the next few weeks prepping. I'll teach you how to set up a stress test, how to present your work, how to answer questions. You're not just a coder, Imani. You're an architect. It's time to learn how to present your building. The rest of the week was a maelstrom of activity. Marcus set up a shared repository and they began to work in tandem. He taught her about server-side optimization, database indexing, and how to create a more robust user-facing interface. She was a sponge, soaking up every piece of information, her brain processing the new concepts with astonishing speed. She was working harder than ever before, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a chore. It felt like a mission. The hardest part, however, was facing her parents. Her mother, a practical and hardworking woman, had been devastated by the suspension. The scholarship was more than just a financial aid package. It was a symbol of her daughter's hard-won success. Imani, how could you be so reckless? Her mother had asked, her eyes filled with tears. You had a future there. A path. You threw it all away for an app. But Imani, emboldened by her talk with Marcus, didn't back down. She didn't argue or get defensive. She sat her parents down and, in the language of a true developer, explained her why. She showed them Nexus on her laptop. She demonstrated the project sharing feature, scrolling through the diverse and brilliant work of her peers. She showed them the thoughtful comments, the collaborative discussions, the mentor-mentee relationships forming in the digital space she had created. It's not just an app, Mom, she said. It's a community. It's a place for all the kids like me, the ones with great ideas who don't fit into a box. Principal Albright didn't just tell me I couldn't code. She told me my dreams weren't valid. This, she said, gesturing to the screen, is my answer. Her mother watched, her initial anger slowly melting into understanding. She saw the passion in her daughter's eyes, the quiet strength that had replaced the crushing defeat she had seen a month ago. She saw not a rebellious child, but a visionary. The fear of what they had lost was still there, but it was now overshadowed by a quiet pride in the world her daughter had built. So, this man Marcus, you trust him? Her father asked, ever the pragmatist. He's a professional, Dad, Imani said. He believes in what I'm doing. He's going to help me show everyone, the reporters, the parents, Principal Albright, that this isn't a problem. It's a solution. Her parents exchanged a look. It was a leap of faith, a risk far beyond anything they had ever considered. But they had always believed in their daughter, in her intelligence, and in her heart. And they had seen the fire in her eyes, a fire that had been absent for a long time. Okay, her mother said, her voice soft. We're with you, baby. We'll do whatever we can to help. With her family's support and Marcus's guidance, Imani threw herself into the preparations. She refined the user interface, wrote a concise and compelling presentation, and practiced her pitch over and over again. The day of the showcase arrived with the speed of a comet. The community center was a modest space, but with Marcus's help, they had set up a large screen, a projector, and a few rows of chairs. A camera crew from a local news station was setting up in the corner, and a handful of parents and students were already trickling in. Imani took a deep breath, her heart a drumbeat against her ribs. She was no longer hiding. She was no longer fighting for a grant. She was fighting for a future, not just for herself, but for every quiet dreamer who had ever been told that their passion wasn't real. She took her place at the podium, Marcus a reassuring presence at her side, and looked out at the small crowd. It was time to show them what a girl who couldn't code could do. The hum of the projector was the only sound in the room as Imani stepped up to the podium. The small crowd, a mix of curious parents, local tech reporters, and a handful of students, waited in hushed anticipation. Her hands, resting on the wooden lectern, were slick with sweat. In the back of the room, she saw the stern face of Principal Albright's administrative assistant, a woman Imani had seen many times, now sent as a proxy to witness her public undoing. Imani took a deep breath, centered herself, and began. My name is Imani, and for a long time I was a ghost at Northwood Academy, she began, her voice initially soft, but gaining strength with each word. I was a student with a passion for coding, for building things from nothing. But my passion was invisible to the people who were supposed to see it. It didn't fit into the neat little boxes of approved extracurriculars. It wasn't a sport or a debate club. And when I tried to make it real, when I tried to get the school to support it, I was told it was fanciful, a hobby, and not a real skill. She looked directly at the administrative assistant in the back row, whose face remained a stoic mask. But it is real. And so are the thousands of other passions that exist in Northwood's halls, passions that go uncelebrated, unseen. With a click of a remote, a crisp, clean interface appeared on the large screen behind her. The Nexus logo, a swirling nexus of connected dots, appeared in the center. She began her live demonstration, navigating the app with a fluid ease that only a creator could possess. The audience watched intently as she showcased the app's features. "This is not a social network," she said, her voice clear and authoritative. "It's a digital portfolio platform. Students can create a profile and share their projects, anything from a poem to a 3D model." She clicked on a profile. Liam's Battle of Thermopylae diorama appeared, its intricate details beautifully rendered. She scrolled down, showing the collaborative comments. It's a place for students to find their tribe, to collaborate, and to get feedback from peers who actually understand what they're doing. A reporter, a woman from the local news station, raised her hand. "Ms. Imani, your principal has publicly stated that this app poses a security risk, that it's unmoderated and a disruption." Imani nodded calmly. "Thank you for that question. It's a valid concern, and it's a claim I'd like to address directly." She brought up a new screen on the projector, the back end of Nexus. "What you're seeing here is the administrative dashboard. Every new project and every comment is automatically flagged and scanned for keywords. Any content that violates our terms of service is immediately pulled for manual review." She then demonstrated her moderation log, showing the transparent process, the careful attention to detail. Nexus is not a chaotic, unmoderated space. It's a carefully structured, secure environment built to protect the very students it serves. The reporter's eyes widened. She had come expecting a defensive teenager and found a poised, articulate engineer. Imani then did something she and Marcus had planned. She brought up a screen that displayed the app's analytics. The user count had plummeted from over 100 to barely a dozen after Principal Albright's email. The line graph showed a sharp, dramatic drop. "As you can see, when Principal Albright began her campaign to discredit the app, the user count fell," she said, her voice filled with a quiet, undeniable conviction. "Fear won for a moment. But fear shouldn't stop us from building things, and it shouldn't stop us from creating communities. This app isn't just a passion project. It's an answer to a question no one at Northwood was asking. What about us?" She concluded her presentation by showing a short, powerful video montage. It featured short clips of students at Northwood, a boy sketching in a notebook, a girl meticulously assembling a complex robot, a group of students huddled over a digital music mixer. The footage was raw and honest, set to a soft, uplifting piece of music. It ended with a single line of text on the screen, "Built by the unseen." The room fell silent. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, a parent in the front row, a man who had initially been skeptical, began to clap. A few more joined in, then a wave of applause, building into a thunderous, room-shaking ovation. The reporters were on their feet, snapping pictures and shouting questions. The administrative assistant in the back of the room, her composure finally broken, stood motionless, her face a pale reflection of shock and defeat. The showcase was a triumph. It was a victory not just for Imani, but for every student who had found a home in the app. She had not only proven her skill but had exposed the hypocrisy of Northwood Academy. She had turned a suspension into a spotlight, and a quiet, dismissed passion into a public cause. As the crowd buzzed with excitement, a journalist from a national publication approached her. "Imani, can I get a few more details on your project?" she asked. "This story is bigger than just a school. It's about who gets to innovate and who gets to create." Imani, standing tall, a smile finally gracing her face, knew the world had just changed for her and for every other unseen talent at Northwood Academy. The battle was won, but the war for her future and for the future of her app had just begun. The aftermath of the showcase was not a quiet period of reflection but a tidal wave of attention. News reports and social media posts praised Imani as a tech prodigy, a visionary, and a game-changer. The local news story went viral, picked up by national tech blogs and even a few major news outlets. The narrative, once controlled by Principal Albright, had been completely hijacked. She was no longer a principal defending her school. She was a symbol of a stifling, out-of-touch establishment being publicly outsmarted by a student. 2 days after the showcase, a formal letter arrived for Imani's parents. It was a summons to a special meeting of the Northwood Academy Board of Trustees, a body of powerful, wealthy individuals who held the school's fate in their hands. The letter didn't mention the showcase or the app, but Imani knew exactly what it was about. Principal Albright had been forced to take her case to the top, but this time Imani was ready. She wasn't just a student facing an administrator. She was an innovator with a public platform and a powerful advocate in Marcus Thorne. On the day of the meeting, the Northwood Academy campus felt eerily quiet, the hallways devoid of the usual student buzz. Imani and her parents were met at the entrance by a harried assistant who led them to a large, imposing conference room. Principal Albright was already there, her face a rigid mask of professional composure, but her eyes held a flicker of cold, hard anger. She was flanked by her legal counsel and a representative from the public relations firm she had hired. Imani and Marcus were seated on the opposite side of the table, a clear line drawn in the sand. The board members, a collection of stern-faced men and women in tailored suits, sat at the head of the table. The chairman, a man with a booming voice and a perfectly coiffed gray haircut, opened the meeting with a tone of grim formality. "Principal Albright, please present your case." Principal Albright spoke with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to public speaking. She detailed Imani's insubordination, the unauthorized use of school resources, and the serious security risks of the Nexus app. She presented screenshots of student profiles, carefully cherry-picking a few comments that she deemed inappropriate or unproductive. She concluded with a firm recommendation that Imani's scholarship be revoked and her suspension be made a permanent expulsion. When she finished, Marcus Thorne stepped forward. He didn't need a microphone or a slideshow. His calm, commanding presence filled the room. "With all due respect, what you've just heard is a one-sided, out-of-date analysis of a revolutionary piece of technology. I'm here as a professional software engineer and, more importantly, a mentor. I have personally audited Imani's code. It is not only secure and scalable, but it also employs a more sophisticated moderation system than many public platforms. The Nexus app is not a risk, it's a model. It's the future of education, a place where students can truly collaborate and create without the constraints of an outdated system." He then showed them the live user dashboard. As he spoke, the user numbers, which had initially plummeted, were now skyrocketing, fueled by the media attention and a growing sense of solidarity. A flurry of new projects and new members were pouring in, a living, breathing testament to the app's undeniable value. Principal Albright, who had thought she could destroy the app's community, had instead made it stronger. Then it was Imani's turn to speak. She didn't use jargon or corporate platitudes. She spoke from the heart. "When I came to Northwood, I was told it was a place where anything was possible," she said, her voice clear and strong. "But when I tried to make something of my own, when I tried to bring my ideas to life, I was told they didn't matter. I was told I couldn't code. I'm not here today to argue about my suspension. I'm here to show you that what you call a disruption is actually a solution. Nexus is a place where students can connect with their passions and with each other. It's a place where we are seen." A palpable silence fell over the room as she finished. The board members exchanged glances, their faces no longer stern but contemplative. The decision was not about an app. It was about the school's reputation, its future, and its legacy. The chairman cleared his throat. "We have reviewed all the evidence," he said, his voice no longer booming but subdued. "We have taken into account the public feedback, the media reports, and the overwhelming success of Ms. Imani's platform. We find that the actions taken against her were disproportionate and unjustified. We hereby order that Imani's suspension be lifted immediately, and her scholarship be reinstated without any conditions. Furthermore, we will be launching a full review of Northwood's technological and educational policies, as well as an investigation into Principal Albright's conduct." A gasp from Principal Albright's side of the table was the only sound. Imani's parents embraced her, tears streaming down their faces. Marcus gave her a quiet nod of victory. But Imani's eyes were fixed on Principal Albright. The woman who had dismissed her, who had tried to break her, was finally facing the consequences of her actions. There was no anger in Imani's heart, only a quiet, resolute sense of justice. The next day, Imani walked back into Northwood Academy not as a ghost, but as a legend. Students in the hallway gave her high fives and words of encouragement. Teachers who had once ignored her, now asked her about the app with a newfound respect. She was no longer just Imani, she was the girl who had challenged the system and won. Principal Albright, disgraced and under investigation, was nowhere to be seen. Her office was empty, her reign of silent prejudice over. Imani's final act of defiance was not to gloat or to seek revenge. She spent her free time in the library, not in hiding but in full view of everyone, mentoring other students on how to use Nexus. She taught them to build their own projects, to find their own voices, to build their own worlds. She was an architect building a community, not just a program. Her future, once defined by the whims of a wealthy principal, was now her own. She had built it line by line on a laptop in a library, and it was beautiful. Dear viewer, if you've watched up to this point, thank you for your support. I have a small request. If you enjoy my stories, you can subscribe to the channel, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts about the stories in the comments. Enjoy watching. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video.